Read this quote. Thought it was pretty neat, so I'm going to share it with you. It says, "Too often we try to use God to change our circumstances, while He is using our circumstances to change us." You know, sometimes our circumstances can make us smile. Sometimes our circumstances, they make us sad. How often do we look at what is going on around us and ask an important question, ask God and say, what is it that you're trying to show me? You know, the situation that Israel was in, as we're going to look at a passage of Scripture that we've been looking at for a little bit now, but it was definitely influenced by God, very clearly influenced by God. And a few of the people in this humbled themselves before God. Some of them dug their heels in and were not going to budge on what God was showing. And some were too afraid of those that were digging their heels in to do anything, so they just followed along like sheep, like the bad sheep, all right, doing what was wrong, doing what was evil in the eyes of God, because they did not have the fear of God like they should have had. Baal worship in Israel at the time was vehemently promoted. The lovely Queen Jezebel was, as much as she could, forcing people into Baal worship. And sadly, almost everyone followed that trail and replaced God with this silly little idol which meant nothing, called Baal. The interesting thing is what Baal's specialty was, or supposed to be. Do you know what Baal's specialty was? He was the maker of rain. It hadn't rained in 42 months. He wasn't doing a very good job of what he was doing. 3.5 years where God said, no more rain. We're going to have a little contest between God and this little rock here called Baal. You know, take your Bibles, if you will, and come with me to 1 Kings chapter 18. I've been looking at Elijah, and Elijah first went and he talked in chapter 17 to Ahab and told him it's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain. It wasn't in his power. He was doing that in God's. Let's look there real quick. You're in chapter 18. Go to chapter 17, verse 1, just so I don't confuse things here. It says, "And Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word." But he was definitely pointing it all at God, and he was God's man. All right? We see in chapter 18 in verse 1, and it says, "And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So we see here it says in the 3rd year. In the 3rd year of what? Is in the 3rd year of what he was just talking about there. He was in Zarephath. All right? So we see that, just to kind of fill you in on the timeline here, so this was in the 3rd year. So he was in Zarephath, boarding, as you might say, with this widow lady for probably about 2.5 years, give or take a couple of months, which means that he was at the brook Cherith for about a year. Again, give or take, 2 or 3 months. But he was there at the brook until it dried up, and then he waited for God to tell him to go. And so he's there for about a year. He was about 2.5 years roughly with the widow at Zarephath, and then he was told to go talk to Ahab because God was going to make it rain. All right, we see that it was 3. It tells us there, but in James chapter 5 and verse 17 makes it really clear. It says, "Elias," or Elijah, "was a man subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months," or 42 months. All right, and we see what had happened here. If we come back here to chapter 18 here in 1 Kings, the situation that they had, that the circumstances that they were living under, Jezebel was an evil, vile woman, all right? As I mentioned this morning, she came from the place called Phoenicia, where they worship Baal, and she brought that Baal worship with her. I think it was a a marriage of alliance with Ahab, trying to make peace with his country because it was right there, okay, just off of Samaria where he was the king, all right? And what he did here was he married this wicked woman named Jezebel, but if you look at verse 13, this is what she did. Was it not told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water. But what see here, what Jezebel was doing in order to promote her Baal worship, when there's a little bit of opposition, she killed many of God's prophets that were there. She didn't get Elijah. Elijah wasn't even in Israel. He was in Zarephath, all right? But she killed many of these prophets, and this fellow named Obadiah, who was kind of a different fella, all right? We're not really going to look too much at him right now, but he was almost like Ahab's second-hand man, except for the fact that he feared God, all right? But it seems like he kind of kept that a secret, or he wouldn't have been doing what he was doing, okay? We're not going to get into the qualities of Obadiah at this time, but he did manage to, and as he told Elijah here in verse 13, he hid 100 of these prophets that as Jezebel was trying to kill them, and he hid them and fed them and gave them the water and so forth. But Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord. So that I want you to get the idea here, all right? What is it like in Israel? Tension is very high. We've got a battle going on between wanting to force this Baal worship on these Israelites, and these Israelites forsaking God, all right? Prophets were hidden. Food was scarce. If we take a look at verse number 5, it says, And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go into the land unto the fountains of the water, and unto all the brooks. Peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. Ahab was concerned about losing his horses. You know what that is? That's military strength. All right? If the horses die, well, now all we got is foot soldiers. All right? So the situation here after 3.5 years is getting very dire in Israel. And he's worried about military strength. It's interesting when you think about this. It's 3.5 years into the famine. Now, I mentioned this morning that I just finished reading the account, one of my favorite accounts in the Bible, the story of Joseph. Do you remember how long the famine was in Joseph's day? It was 7 years long, exactly double what this drought is that he's having here. Except by this time, in Joseph's day, Joseph had purchased for Pharaoh all of the cattle, all of the sheep, all of the land, and all of the people. All right? Everything now belonged to Pharaoh. Ahab didn't have a Joseph. You know what Ahab had? Hungry, thirsty, anxious people. That's what Ahab had. All right? There was a struggle for power. There was persecution. And according to Romans chapter 11 and verse 14, there was still 7,000 people left that had not bowed the knee to Baal. That's a lot of people. But when you consider the millions of people that there was there, and only 7,000 of them hadn't succumbed to what Jezebel was pushing, all right? And I want you to know something. Point number 1. God is always in charge. And his side is the winning side. All right? It may not look like it at this point, but his side is the winning side. As bad as things were in Zarephath, where Elijah was, look at verse number 2 there in chapter 18. It says, And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. As bad as it was in Zarephath where he was, it was worse in Samaria. He hadn't been there for a number of years, but he knew that it was not raining because he'd prayed for that, as I mentioned there in James, where it says that he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it did not rain, all right? But here, I told you before, Ahab, at the point where Ahab becomes king, it says that he did worse than all the kings before him, all right? He is a bad guy. His wife, terrible queen. But I want you to feel sorry for Ahab for a minute, all right? I want you to think about Ahab's situation. Before I go there, I did a little reading on, there was a survey that was done in September of 2021. And it says there was 7 out of every 10 American adults agree that suffering is mostly a consequence of people's own actions. And that's what the suffering was happening here. It was a consequence of them pushing God out, replacing God with Baal. Now, understand where Ahab is. He probably, he knows who, Ahab knows who Elijah is, okay, by name, I believe, at this point. It says that he was searching for him through all the countries and everything. But he probably doesn't even remember what he looks like. Do you remember what Elijah did? Was he got into the palace. Look in chapter 17. It says, and Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, verse 1, said unto Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, get thee hence. So he goes in there and he makes this announcement. It's not going to rain until I say it's going to rain. And God says, get out of there. And then he's gone. All right? What's Ahab think? Who is this loon, and why was he in my palace, and where did he go? All right? Remember when David made the foolish choice? He was running from Saul, and he thought, you know what? It'd be a good idea if I go to Gath, and I'll stay there. And I don't know how he thought this. Who came from Gath? Goliath was from Gath. He killed Goliath. As a matter of fact, when he goes to Gath, he has got a sword. Guess whose sword he's carrying? Goliath's sword, all right? He gets there, and he thinks he's going to have some asylum there, and then the people there, they're saying, isn't this the king? They called him the king, although he was not the king yet. I thought that's very interesting. But they say, isn't this the king whom they said, that Saul hath slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? And then the light comes on for David, and he says, this was a bad place. I shouldn't be here. And so David pretends that he's nuts, and he starts drooling and scrabbling on the door and all that kind of stuff. And Achish says, do I have need of madmen? Get this guy out of here. All right? Kind of reminds me of that when we see where Elijah comes to there, and Ahab's looking like, who is this guy? And he can't stop the rain. We got Baal. And then he's gone. All right? After a couple weeks, maybe a month, I'm pretty sure he starts to thinking, who was that guy? Let's go bring him back, okay? It tells us that he looked all over all the different countries, and he made them swear that they didn't know where this guy was. He didn't have a photo of him, okay? Couldn't put little pictures on all the telephone poles, missing prophet, or something like that. But I want you to think here. What's Elijah done to the country? Well, God's done it, but it's through Elijah. They're getting in starvation, you're right. Ahab is not going to like Elijah, all right? Ahab hates Elijah. Ahab is mad at Elijah. But Ahab needs Elijah. He needs him bad because he needs him to make it rain. But it's been 42 months. When Elijah comes back, what's Ahab going to think? What's his price to make it rain? What's his price? And he knows when he introduced himself to begin with that he is the God before whom I stand. Maybe part of his price has got something to do with Baal. And that's going to be a problem for Ahab. Because his wife is the one bringing in Baal. And now he's going to have to deal with Jezebel. Who wants to deal with her? Not even Ahab. All right? I want you to see something here. The condition that Israel was in. Point number 2. Sin looks like the easy way out. It looks like the easy way out. All of Israel, except for 7,000 people, bowed the knee to Baal. All except for 7,000. You know why? sin, it's simple. Sin looks like it's easy. Sin is more popular. As I said, millions of people turned against God. The problem with sin is it's a labyrinth of traps. And the more time that is spent in the sin, the more complicated it gets to get out of that sin. This is a warning to our young people. Sit up and listen. You know what? All the warnings you get to stay away from some of these things, if you dabble in these things, they'll get a hold of you. And you know the easiest time to get away from those things is now. Because once you dabble, that it is a lie from the pit of hell to say, I'll just try it once. You whet an appetite for something that God has said we should not do, should not have, should not see, should not participate in. That appetite is wet. And you're in trouble. But while you're still young, get out of that stuff. Surrender to God. Serve God. We're all going to sin. I understand that. But you know what? There are some sins that just... There's some things, and I'll be honest here. All right? There are some things that have never... I've through the grace of God and through some things that I never tried. I'll give you a little story. All right? As far as drinking and so forth like that. All right? When I was a little kid, I was 12 years old, and we were on the beach in Turkey Point, and it was like 10 o'clock at night. Why we were out there, I don't know. There was 3 of us kids out there, and we decided we were going to go sit up on top of the lifeguard chair. And while we were up on the lifeguard chair, there's a motorcycle gang having a party right out in front. We're clueless. I'm the oldest one. I'm 12. Well, we saw 2 of these guys. They start walking over towards the lifeguard chair. So I said, you guys go down first, because I was the oldest. One kid was only like 8. So when I got down, these 2 guys were there, and they were going to beat the stuffing out of this little kid. And I started running. My hat fell out, which actually belonged to my brother, and they took that. But they dumped 2 bottles of beer on my head as I was running. And there was a bunch of adults on the street. They weren't doing a thing. They were just going to let them do whatever they were going to do. But I was running. The sand was smoking under my feet. I was trying to get away so fast. And you know what? From that blessed experience, I absolutely always hated the smell of beer. It's never been a temptation for me. All right? Never been. But then there's other things. I remember stepping out of Woolco one time. Anybody remember Woolco? Oh, yeah. And there's a girl out there, and she's, hey, you want to smoke some of this? Why would I do that, But there's just some things that God let me not take to touch, which I've never had a temptation there. But there's other areas that I've been tempted because I dabbled with a little bit of stuff. And the point is this: sin, it will get a hold of you. It looks like the easy way out. It looks like it's simple. All of these Israelites, they decided, we'll just follow this Jezebel and do what this is because everybody else is doing it. It costs them greatly. And you know what? Sin in your life will cost you greatly. If you've had your parents or you've read in God's Word, there's some things that we just need to stay away from those things. Getting away from that sin. You talk to some addict somewhere trying to get away from that when you just had one little needle one time. That's never one time. It's never one time. It gets a hold of you and you can't get rid of that thing. Here's the neat thing about sin, though. God will forgive. But the consequences are great. And some people, they'll go to God for forgiveness, but you know what? They just won't give up because the consequences are there and it's too hard to let it go. Sin looks like the easy way. All kinds of promises, nothing given at the end. Anyway, Ahab. Ahab saw great things. Ahab got to see, we'll look at next week, Ahab got to see the fire of God fall down and completely nuke the altar. The sacrifice was gone. The stones were gone. The water was gone. The dust was gone. It was all gone. He got to see that. He got to see that God stopped the rain for 42 months. And then he got to see when God said the rain's going to come, and Elijah says, you better hurry up and go because it's going to start raining. He got to see that, but you know what Ahab decided to do? Stick with the old ways because he was trapped in that sin. A really cool verse. You're going to say you're sadistic, Pastor Taylor. Well, maybe a little bit, but this just, I love this. All right? Flip over a couple pages to 1 Kings chapter 22. 1 Kings chapter 22, verse number 34. It says, and a certain man drew a bow at a venture. You know what that means? They're having war, all right? And there's a whole bunch of enemies over there, and one of the soldiers pulls out a bow. I'll just shoot one in there, and hopefully I'll hit something. And he fires his bow at a venture. There's a whole bunch of people there. We'll see what happens. And there's Ahab. And it says, and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Here's what happened. Ahab is in his chariot. Okay? And the armor is there, and he's completely protected, unless you move a certain way. Jezebel texted him, all right? And he pulled out his phone. I don't know what he did, but he moved, all right? And as he moved, the armor just slid, just a little bit. So there's a little wee gap. And just perchance. What a lucky shot, all right? Perchance, as that armor is there, that arrow goes through that little wee tiny slot into Ahab. Smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Wherefore he said unto the driver of his chariot, turn thine hand and carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. He's more than wounded. Ahab had Jezebel, evil Jezebel, had killed a man named Naboth so that Ahab could have his land. And Ahab did nothing about it, but he went and he took the land. And where Naboth was killed, they stoned him, all right? Elijah comes while Ahab is looking at his new property that he's basically stolen from this dead guy. In 1 Kings chapter 21, you're in 22, just look at 21, verse 19. And God tells Ahab, or Elijah rather, to tell Ahab this, and thou shalt speak unto him, saying, thus saith the Lord, hast thou killed and also taken possession? And thou shalt speak unto him, saying, thus saith the Lord, in the place where the dogs licked the blood of Naboth, shall the dogs lick thy blood, even thine. I can imagine after he hears this that Ahab thinks, you know what? I'm just not going to go where that happened. I'm going to stay away from that spot. It's kind of like the Newfie who heard a little stat that says that most people get into car accidents within 1 mile of their home. So he moved, all right? No. But there's Ahab. He says, I'm not going to go there. But you know what? He comes back. He's been wounded. He dies. They take his chariot. Guess where they take it? They take it where Naboth was killed. And in chapter 22 and verse 38, it says, and one washed the chariot in the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, and they washed his armor according unto the word of the Lord which he spake. Just like God told him. Your blood's going to get licked up right in that same spot. Ahab saw some of the great things that God has done. We have seen some great things that God has done. Ahab decided to stay in his sin. He was a wicked king. He was a foolish king. He stayed in that wickedness, and there's the end of Ahab. All right? Seeing a couple points here. First one, we can't escape God because God is always in charge, and his side is the winning side. Point number 2, sin looks like the easy way out, but its consequences are deadly. And point number 3, where is our dependence? We see here in chapter 18 of 1 Kings, Elijah comes to Ahab. Look at verse 17. It says, and it came to pass, when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, art thou he that troubleth Israel? Now at first glance, it looks like he's just kind of, yelling at Elijah. But remember, he needs Elijah. He needs Elijah. What he's saying here, a part of it, I believe, is he's trying to make sure that the guy he's talking to is Elijah. Because he doesn't remember what he looks like. It's been 3.5 years, and he saw him for a minute and a half, all right? But here he comes, and he says that, but Elijah's response, all right? Elijah's response is not so much a self-defense. We might want to jump in there and defend ourselves, but what he does is he wants to make known the position that they are in before God. Verse 18, and he answered, speaking of Elijah, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Baalim. We see this here, and it carries on. Verse number 19, all right? Now therefore send. Here's Elijah. Imagine this, okay? Here's this man. He's standing before the king, all right? The king kind of says something, maybe rub him a little bit the wrong way, and Elijah throws it right back at him, but then he starts ordering the king. Verse 19, now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. All right? The sin of Baal worship, understand here, this is the reason why it hasn't rained. And the sin of Baal worship has to be acknowledged by Israel in order for God to pull back his hand and allow the rain to come. All right? And also this, Ahab cannot be allowed to think that there is any other cause other than God. He has to know that, all right? When he tells him all this stuff, you just look at the authority that Elijah is speaking with here. Do this. Now, therefore, send and gather to me, all right? Elijah speaks with authority. Verse number 20, we see here, this is what Ahab does. So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel, and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. Ahab obeyed at least part way. At least part way. He brought the 450 prophets of Baal, but he didn't bring the 400, probably because Jezebel said, no, you're not getting them. All right? They're sitting at my table, and they don't get those 400, not at this point. But the 450 do come to Mount Carmel. When it talks here, when it says, send and gather all Israel, he's not meaning all 2 million Israelites aren't going to fit in this one spot. But what he would be doing here is we need representation of all of Israel here. And what this does is these representatives that he would call, probably some from each tribe and people that were, in some kind of position there and so forth. What this does, they're getting a royal invitation. Then they can come. They're there to sneak over there to see what's going on. That might put their lives in jeopardy, but not when they have a royal invitation to say you need to come. All right? These were orders that were given, but I want you to see something. The place where they were to come. I think there's more to what Elijah says than what is recorded here, because there's a specific place where they were to come on Mount Carmel. It's a big place. Look at verse 30. It says, and Elijah said unto all the people, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. There was an altar there. He brought them back to a place where they had worshiped God. And that altar was broken down. And I don't know if we look at the other verse there, verse 26, all right, it says, and they took, this is speaking of the prophets of Baal, and it says, and they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from the morning and even until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered, and they leaped upon the altar which was made. It's possible that they built the altar, although to me it sounds like what they've done is that there is an altar that's there. They've knocked down God's altar, and they had already put an altar of Baal at that spot. And that's where Elijah wanted them to come to, where they had worshiped God before. But now, you know what they'd done? They had replaced God with Baal. They'd replaced God. Ahab, here's the situation. Ahab wanted rain. He was willing to do pretty much anything to get it. But 42 months before, there is no way that Ahab would have thought or ever imagined that he was going to take orders from this hairy guy with a leather belt who looks like a loon in his court, and he's going to be taking orders from that guy? Me, Ahab? I'm the king of Israel. I'm the son of Omri. But here he is. Excuse me. Here he is now taking orders from him. I'm sure that Ahab felt this humiliation. Humiliation is necessary before God. We saw this morning the Syrophoenician lady, a Canaanite lady. She had to be humbled before Christ. We need to be humbled before him. It is necessary for Ahab, it's necessary for you, it's necessary for me to humble ourselves before God. God blesses a land whose leaders depend on him. That's why many of the things that we have in this country we still have, because of original leaders that had followed God. Not the ones we have now, but the ones that we had in the past had followed God. And all throughout the Parliament buildings, you will see verses of Scripture all over, stuff engraved on the walls and on furniture and all over the place, because they followed God. Country's gone away from that. But God blessed the country, and we're kind of on the tail end of those blessings. But God blesses the church whose people depend on him. We depend on him. Our dependence is not on programs. Programs are good. Joy Club, wonderful thing. But we don't depend on those programs. We don't depend on technology. These screens are wonderful and so forth. Or a well-lit auditorium. We don't depend on those things. We need to depend on God. Depend on him. Our dependence has to be on him so that we can grow in grace. We can grow in grace. Elijah showed his absolute trust and dependence upon God when he stood there boldly before the king and said that I serve a thrice holy God. Well, he didn't say those actual words, but you understand what I'm saying. He served God. Now Elijah failed because he's a man. He failed later on and he doubted and so forth, but right here his dependence, his full dependence is upon God, and God was going to use him in an absolutely phenomenal way. Where's your trust? Where is your dependence? Young people, where is your dependence? Older people, where is your dependence? Is it on what you've got in the bank? What I've saved up? My retirement fund? Or is my dependence upon God? That's where our dependence needs to be. Trust and obey. For what? There's no other way to be happy in Jesus but trust and obey. We're going to sing that song in just a moment, but let's pray first. Precious Father, again, we thank you for your goodness. Thank you for